From government's mouthpiece to a public broadcaster, from financially viable to cash-strapped, how do you rate 25 years of the SABC? Let's get started. Good evening and welcome to the Democracy Gauge. I'm Krivani Pillay, standing in for Bongani Bingwa. The history of broadcasting in South Africa can be traced back to 17th July 1950, when a commercial radio service was established with daily news bulletins in both English and Afrikaans. This radio service was popularly known as Springbok Radio. 69 years later, the SABC's mandate today as a public broadcaster comes from the charter laid down in Chapter 4 of the Broadcasting Act. The mandate requires the SABC to encourage development of South African expression by providing, in the official languages, a wide range of programming that reflects South African attitudes, opinions, ideas, values, and artistic creativity. To also display our talent in educational and entertaining programs, offer a plurality of views and a variety of news, information and analysis from a South African point of view, and advance the national and public interest. It's been 25 years since the SABC transitioned from a state broadcaster into a public broadcaster. Prior to 1994, the National Party used it as a propaganda tool, censoring dissenting voices and programs. But how far has the public broadcaster come? So on our poll tonight, we're asking, is the public broadcaster still your primary source of information? You can choose from 3 colors: green, yes; yellow, maybe; and of course you choose red if you don't think so. But interact with our poll topic on Facebook and Twitter. Remember to use the hashtag SABCDG25 or hashtag SABC News. You can also send us WhatsApp videos to 065 862 4548. But first, our producer Lindiwe Mabena takes a look at the role of the SABC in the past 25 years.
The SABC has come a long way since the days of apartheid.
Those days, it was a totally different SABC. Everything was done according to strict racial segregation.
Well, very difficult to do your job as a journalist because the management at the time decided how the news should be molded.
Today, it boasts policies that safeguard public interest, diversity, and journalistic integrity in accordance with legislative acts and the Constitution. Transformation of the SABC began in 1990 when Nelson Mandela was released from prison and political parties, including the ANC, were unbanned. It became a public broadcaster following the first elections in 1994.
Up to the end of the 90s, it felt like we did what a public broadcaster should do. And there was good cooperation at the time between the SABC management, civil society, and generally support from the political parties.
The broadcaster relatively managed to steer clear of political interference for several years after 1994. However, things started to change. Some argue the company began focusing on becoming a commercial enterprise while losing sight of its public broadcasting mandate. In 1999, government became its sole shareholder in a move meant to give the state more oversight on the public broadcaster's finances to avoid financial problems. However, political meddling became more apparent with governing party sympathizers being appointed at board level. In 2008, the once financially viable public broadcaster went bankrupt due to alleged poor governance. The controversial blacklist saga was exposed with allegations that some political parties and analysts were banned from content coverage. The 2016 banning of footage depicting violent protests was another blow to the fight for an independent public broadcaster. Some of the corporation's news staff, together with civil society, challenged the ban. 8 senior journalists who took a stand were fired and subsequently rehired when the Labour Court reinstated them.
We have currently strong leadership who shields the newsroom from political interference.
We've developed into one of the biggest broadcasters in Africa, if not the biggest in Africa. For an example, like our newsroom situation is a very unique one. You can imagine how many bulletins we put out on air on a daily basis compared to the 3 bulletins that we used to do in the early days in 1982.
It's been a bittersweet 25 years. The broadcaster has been at the heart of most of the country's democratic journey. From the comprehensive coverage of the TRC to the 2010 FIFA World Cup to detailed countrywide coverage of every election since 1994. But it's been the broadcaster's financial woes that have dominated headlines. With the advancement of digital technologies, it's hard to predict what the next 25 years have in store for the public broadcaster. For now, it remains the broadcaster of choice for millions of South Africans, particularly in rural areas.
And thank you to Lindiwe Mabena. Now let's get into the discussion with our guests on the Democracy Gauge this evening. And joining us is Duduetsang Makhuse, National Coordinator of SOS Coalition, and Reg Ramney, financial journalist and media researcher. Reg, Duduetsang, thank you so much for your time. Firstly, how would the both of you reflect on 25 years of the SABC? Let's start with you, Duduetsang.
Sure, I think my reflections of the past 25 years are really from the audience perspective. As a young South African growing up watching CTV, Good Morning South Africa, Kidio, Mr. Smith and the mathematics programming, as well as like really great vernacular dramas, Bophelo ke Sempero. That's my perspective of it. It's not until varsity that I come to grips with the journalism trade and really the media practice of what's happening here.
As well as the activism.
As well as the activism, indeed.
What about you, Reg?
Well, I actually was a part of the SABC for 5 years, from 1995 until 2000. And I can say that, and I've also researched the SABC and looked at it, and I can say that it's been iconic of transformation, in fact. It was one of the first organizations that was racially transformed, very dramatically and very iconically. And I think it's really been under attack over the 25 years. There's always a constant threat of government interference. It isn't always realized. And then there's like a Prague Spring revolution of independent journalism and so forth. But I think it certainly remains a very integral part of our society and very important.
I read in a publication of yours, Reg, in Playing the Piper, that if the SABC ceases to exist today, 65% of South Africans would lose their information, their access to information. And community radio, TV and newspapers won't be able to fill that gap.
Absolutely.
So we're at a point now where we find ourselves in a funding model crisis, in a financial instability, but there is a constitutional imperative of the SABC. Talk to us about this present state that we find ourselves in.
Well, I just let me say that I think that what is essential is for government, as the sole shareholder of the SABC and as the sole shareholder who didn't intervene when they should have, I think it is imperative that they actually recapitalize the SABC. Not just a guarantee. I think they actually need to inject new funds into the SABC because it's their fault that what happened. If the SABC is really so important for people looking for news and other content in their own languages, we're unique as a public broadcaster in that respect, I think.
Duduetsang, at the start of the interview, you talked about your reflections as an audience member. And one of the things was the dramas in the vernacular. So I want to focus on languages now, because language is protected in the Constitution. But there's also a very worrying call for perhaps as part of the funding model or to save money for some of the language stations to close down. That argument may be worrying for some. It might be a financial win for some. But from a constitutional point of view, where do you see the issue of language sitting at the SABC?
I think the issue of language is very central to what the SABC's mandate is about. Language is one of the tools that we use to sort of bring and showcase our differences, as well as bring people together. When you remove the SABC's ability to produce local language content, essentially nobody else is going to pick up that baton. Otherwise, other people would be doing it right now. Local languages are not necessarily the most lucrative type of content to produce, but it's imperative that we keep that space, because if you look at our education system, if you look at even going online, finding vernacular websites that are written in isiZulu and isiXhosa and so on is very hard to do. So if we're going to keep a space for South Africans and you know, and even our neighbors next door to have a space where they can engage with knowledge and information in their mother languages, then we have to make sure that the SABC still plays that role.
Well, we're going to continue this conversation with both Dudu Etsang and Reg Ramney. And after the break, we'll focus on the funding model, but we're also going to gauge your views on the role of the SABC in democratic South Africa. Stay tuned.
As the world prepares to mark Nelson Mandela International Day this July, we speak to Africans on the continent and in the diaspora who are doing good. Individuals who reflect the values and legacy of South Africa's first democratically elected president.
It is a story about humanity's great capacity for goodness, for peace, and for hope.
Nelson Mandela was one of humanity's great leaders. He embodied the highest values of the United Nations.
Every day when you watched him lead from the front, from the back, from the side, was a masterclass.
Watch African Perspective on SABC News Channel 404 every Wednesday night at 9:30 p.m. Central African Time.
SABC is the official broadcaster of AFCON 2019, Africa's beautiful story.
Welcome back. It's all about you here on the Democracy Gauge. The People's View, our next segment, allows you to interact with us live and share your views candidly. Let's gauge your views now.
Kubuhlungu okwenzekayo kulesi sikhathi samanje ukuthi abantu bawufuna kangaka umsebenzi, kodwa lo hulumeni esimvotelayo, lo hulumeni esamkhetha sambeka lapha phambili ukuthi akasilwele thina, usayida nalabantu abathi akwehliswa abantu emsebenzini. Uphela kanjani umsebenzi ka SABC bekhona abantu okumele besebenze ubungafanishini nawo ngendlela?
SABC is my number one social media. If it wasn't for SABC, everything of my life would be shattered. So big up to everyone who takes information from SABC, one and only trusted source of information. It will never let you down. So you better keep your trust in it.
I still believe about that because SABC is still my source of primary of information. They give me all relevant information. They keep me up to date and everything, and I'm very grateful about that. Please keep it up.
And we continue our discussion with our guest, Dudu Etsang Makuse, National Coordinator of the SOS Coalition, and Reg Ramney, financial journalist and media researcher. Now I want to get into the nitty-gritty of things. The funding model.
Yes.
Is it time to change? What is our current model, and what should we aspire to look like?
Well, I think a mixed funding model is still viable, though certain things need to change within that. And in fact, the SABC's submission to Parliament, I think it was in 2018, suggested a number of things, like tightening up on the license fee problem, because that is a problem. A lot of people just not paying. I think government should be more interventionist or less interventionist, but it seems to intervene at the wrong time. So I think the government should watch carefully the finances of the SABC so we don't get into this trouble again, but they need to recapitalize.
And your view on the funding model?
I think it's definitely time to relook at it, but again, you can't go too drastically to change it, because at this stage we're sitting with a combination of public and commercial funding because of global dynamics and really the nature of media companies at this stage. I think there's room for improvement, definitely, in terms of how we use the resources that we produce, how we exploit content, and whether or not it travels beyond the SABC's platforms. So there's all kinds of opportunities that are going to come in. If you look at, the digital changes that are going to come in place, there's a lot of opportunities there to make, to increase revenues at least. But I think to stick with an advertising-based model is really dangerous because it's broken for most companies at this stage.
It's very true. It's very true.
But we're noticing that it's not only us that's struggling, it's public broadcasting all over the world. But is there a case to be made to save the SABC?
A case to be made to save public broadcasting all over the world. I mean, news media is under pressure all over the world. But, I think the problem is that public organisations are not always good at marketing themselves. So I get my news from the SABC via your app, which is an excellent app.
Thank you. But, onto more serious issues. We talk about a Chapter 9 institution. Somebody say that's dangerous territory to go in. It's not. Where do you and SOS stand on that?
So, the coalition has been advocating for the SABC to become a Chapter 9 for many years now. And I think part of that has been because of the structural issues that the SABC has faced, particularly in terms of its legal structure and how that was then abused to allow for political interference. If you look at the oversight role that Parliament is supposed to be playing and how they have not played that role. So the thinking is that if you turn it into a Chapter 9 institution, that you essentially add another layer of accountability and checks and balances. Is it foolproof? Absolutely not. It's just an additional mechanism to make sure that in the instance where, your policymaker goes beyond policymaking and your committees are not playing the oversight role, that you still have a framework that allows you to protect the independence and the governance of the institution. The flip side of it is that if it's not a corporation, it doesn't have to subscribe to things like the King's Code. So it's a toss-up, and I think at this stage you're looking for whatever framework or whatever mechanism that allows you to deal with the legacy issue so that you don't have to repeat, trying to solve the same crisis over and over again.
Where do you stand on the issue? Not fully supporting a Chapter 9 institution?
Well, isn't the Public Protector a Chapter 9 institution?
Yeah.
Anyway, so look, I don't look, I think the problems are really fundamentally financial, and you have to solve those. I don't know if a Chapter 9 institution is going to help. And we have to look very carefully at how we fix the financial problems before they become a disaster. Because the SABC went from having R1 billion in cash to having not enough to pay, suppliers and salaries in a very short space of time.
But the one thing, elections have come and gone. Not a single political party talked about a funding model in their manifesto. Should we be concerned? Because when it comes to election time, all of them want coverage.
It's a general, what would you call it, lack of interest in news media by people. I find it very difficult to get people to take seriously the problem of how to finance news media in general, not only the SABC.
So as we look at the past 25 years, looking forward to your next 25 years, how would you rate the SABC? Do you still get your primary source of information from them? Choose your colours.
I'm going to be optimistic and say you've done well.
Thank you.
You have done well, but I get a mix.
Well, I hope that everybody's watching on your verdict. Thank you so much to our guests, Reg Ramney, media researcher and financial journalist, Dudu Etsang Makuse, national coordinator of SOS Coalition. And when we return, we look at this week in 94, and we profile, if you are 48-year-old Mzamo from Kirkwood outside Port Elizabeth, your story is coming up next.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, and I'm not alone. We have the soulful, Grammy-winning Soweto Gospel Choir who will be performing for us later on in the show. Your insurer shouldn't decide whether you can add ubabizala, umzala, or even umamizala to your funeral plan. The OUTsurance funeral plan lets you build your cover with benefits that suit your needs. Choose cover between 30 and 100,000 Rand. Add family members and select cash benefits important to you like transport, catering, after tears, a tombstone, or a marquee.
The way he proposed the OUTsurance thing to me, like, it was very fantastic. The approach was nice and smooth, so it didn't take even long. Only 193 Rand a month for 75,000 cover. The pause and play feature is very important. I can pause for 3 months if I have financial difficulties, and then I can proceed without starting afresh from the beginning.
At OUTsurance, we base your premiums on your unique profile to offer you the cheapest premium we can. You can get 50,000 Rand worth of funeral cover for on average just 4 Rand a day from OUTsurance Life.
I'm a new OUTsurance client, but I've known about OUTsurance through TV advertising. And I was like, yeah, there's something good about this OUTsurance. Then I decided, let me try it. For only 177 per month for a cover of 50,000 Rands. I've covered myself, I've covered my son Tado, and I have benefits as well. Yeah, I think this is a great deal.
Bakhaeshu, finally, a low-cost funeral cover that you can tailor to your needs and that suits your pockets. SMS quote to 44506 or visit outsurance.co.za to complete a free quote on a funeral plan tailored to suit your needs and budget. OUTsurance funeral plan. You always get something out.
As Democracy Gauge reviews our 25 years of democracy, we also dig deep into the archives into our archives to reflect on how far we've come. This week, in 1994, Defence Minister Joe Modise issued a statement that South Africa should end the relationship with Israel. Modise compared Israel's Palestine policy with that of apartheid in South Africa.
Defence Minister Joe Modise has signalled an end to South Africa's special relationship with Israel, comparing the Jewish state's policies with apartheid. Speaking during an interview with Reuters, Mr. Modise also promised action against Israel if proof was provided of police charges that the Mossad Secret Service murdered 2 people in South Africa to stop shipments of strategic chemicals to other Middle East governments. He described Israel as the biggest buster of sanctions against this country, saying Israel was politically in the same trench as the former South African government. Mr. Modise said he would ask the head of Armscor for information about the murders of paint technologist Alan Kidger and chemical engineer Wynand van Wyk, which the police have blamed on Mossad. Israel's ambassador to South Africa, Mr. Alan Leal, has denied the charges and has asked for a meeting with South African officials to discuss the matter. In the same interview, Mr. Modise said South Africa wanted to reach a counter-trade deal in which it would exchange its Rooivalk combat helicopters for naval corvettes. Mr. Modise said South Africa needed the ships to look after coastal waters and to protect ports. Identifying the Rooivalk as a prime candidate for counter-trade, he said Britain was looking for attack helicopters and that the Rooivalk would meet the needs of Britain and many other countries. Armscor has confirmed that the purchase of 4 naval corvettes is in the pipeline, and that announcement can be expected early next year.
Through the Democracy Gauge, SABC News profiles a different South African and their assessment of 25 years of democracy. Today, we're in the Eastern Cape, where we meet 47-year-old Nokwanele Ivy Mzamo. She grew up and worked the land from 1996 in the Eastern Cape. She believes more should be done for the people of the Eastern Cape. Take a look.
Nokwanele Ivy Mzamo. Ndizalelwe eNorthern Cape ngaphandle eDR endaweni ekuthiwa iPhillipstown. Ndaphangela kule fama iseyifama yomuntu omhlophe uMaster Potgieter ngoko. Ndaba iGeneral Walker ndandiphangela emasimini ndingunobhalane apha emasimini. So ke ndingumuntu othandayo kakade ukufunda. So ke njengomphathi owayenikezela i-training kubasebenzi ndaba ngumntu nam ke othanda kakhulu ukuthatha ipart apha ezi-trainingini nento leyo ke yabangela into yokuba ndikwazi uchongwa njengomntu okwaziyo unyuselwa ndaba yi-assistant manager. Ngo-2002 ngela xesha ku-government wayesithi unika amalungelo okuba abantu abamnyama bafumana imihlaba. Saba ke nathi singabo bantu ezabasebenzi abafuna uba makasithengisele le farm. And then ke sayithengelwa ifama ku-government. Kwaye ke singabasebenzi abapermanent abayi-35 ngoko. But ke ixabiso lefama likhulu kakhulu kwanyanzeleka into yoba ke elo umntu aze nesibhawu sakhe ne-family member. Saye ke saba singabantu abayi-70 kuba singabasebenzi singenalwazi lophangaleleyo kuzonyanzeleka ke ba umphathi athathe u-25% wefama ukwenzela into yoba xa etransfera izikills angenzi izinto ngongakhathali kuba esazi uba akho nto azayiluza yena. Kulapho ke saba ke ngokuthina singu-75%. 25% wangowakhe for iminyaka eyi-5. Ndiyabulela ke phofu mna into yokuba kule democracy ke phofu ikhona into thina sayizuzayo ngoba kwayinto yoba sibe ngabanini bemihlaba iba zizinto ezithethwayo ezitivini ibe zizinto ezifundwayo ezincwadini but uthi wawufumanisa we-reality ungaboni into yenzekayo. Idemokhrasi yam ndireyita uyelo kuba ke ayinawuba ngured ngoba ke zininzi izinto ezenzekileyo ezi-positive ezenzeke kuthi njengoba nathi singabanini bomhlaba nje. Kwaye ke njengoba ke sikule industry esitrust thina ziseninzi nezinto ekusafuneka zenzekile.
And that's how we end tonight's edition of Democracy Gauge. Thank you for watching. For me, Krivani Pillay, and the entire team, good night.